Hello, and welcome to another edition of Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham, where Team Needham discusses everything healthcare. I'm your host, Shawn Needham, along with my wonderful wife, Janet, and we are streaming live from downtown Las Vegas, Nevada. Super excited to be doing our midweek podcast today. And we have a guest, Lloyd Glauberman, on our show today. And he is a psychologist that talks about how to make positive changes in lifestyle medicine. He's going to and it's all mind stuff, and we kind of had somebody talk about that Monday, and so you don't want to miss out on this one because change your mind, you can definitely change your habits. So Lloyd, welcome to our show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to this.
All right. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm in private practice now, psychotherapy practice for 40 some odd years. And so I've been around and I've listened to a lot of stories and read a lot of books and heard a lot of lectures. So I have a pretty good background in terms of everything that's occurred in almost a half a century in this business. And in addition to my practice, I sell personal development audio products that can be very useful as an addition to anything somebody is already doing to improve the quality of their life. So I noticed patterns over the course of the times I interacted with people and listening to their stories. And basically, we are stories, and everything that we do is an attempt, hopefully, to change our story in a positive direction. And what I try to do is help people change their stories. So I've been in the business a long time, and I think I've heard every possible story imaginable. And I noticed certain kinds of patterns that obviously repeat themselves, or they wouldn't be patterns. And the whole idea is, can you change some essential patterns that would have a positive ripple effect in a multitude of areas in your life? So that's the short version of who I am and what I've done.
Okay, so how do you make some of those positive changes?
Well, the first thing is to understand just how important awareness is, because so much of what we do is automatic. It's learned by primarily observational learning, especially just imagine you're a child in a family, which we all were. And if you had a reasonably intact family, you ate dinner together. So that's the first theater of human behavior. So what do you learn when you eat dinner, right? Aside from I'm hungry and now I'm not hungry because I ate. Well, if you reflect, you'll realize you learned two kinds of patterns. One is what you eat and how much you eat. And you pay no attention to that as being learned. You just watch what happens. Watch what your parents do, watch how much food they put on your plate, and over time, you just incorporate that model of eating into your brain so that you continue to do this independently of that table, right? Because that's the way I grew up in the 1950s. So I remember now in retrospect, all of the interesting dysfunctional things I learned, right? I even learned how to have a snack 2 hours before dinner, and in order to make my mom happy. I would come home from school. She said, Lloyd, do you want something to eat? And I'll say, I don't know, what do you have? There's a salami in the refrigerator. Why don't you make yourself a sandwich? Okay. And then I'll be eating dinner 2.5 hours later. Not a thought that I'm not hungry. Why am I eating? It's dinner time, right? All right, that's half of what you learn, the food thing. The other thing that you learn is emotional patterning as everybody interacts and you begin to learn what mommy and daddy feel about each other, how they feel about you and your siblings, and all of these subtle little things occur and occur and occur outside of awareness. So as you get older, you have the opportunity, hopefully, to be able to take a look back at a distance and unwind all of that slowly systematically if you have a guide helping you, so that you can begin to reorganize yourself in terms of how you treat yourself, as well as the interactional patterns of social involvement and romantic involvement, which obviously becomes much more complex and there's much more detail. But in terms of an overall framework, you model without knowing you're making that model, and that model plays in the background in your head all the time. That's my job in the role that I've chosen, is to help people pause and reflect in the moment what's happening. There is nothing more powerful than the art of doing nothing. Pausing, thinking, reflecting, and then choosing something a little bit different. That's my job, helping people to pause and think and reflect and develop themselves a bit better.
That's a really good point. Yeah, pause.
Pause. The art of nothing. This should be called The Art of Doing Nothing is the answer to your life.
Right. Yeah. Janet, what questions do you have about that?
Well, wow. I'm thinking about my childhood now, and I'm thinking about all these things that, played into, and one thing that I find very fascinating, I came from a family, there were 6 children.
Did you say 6?
Yeah, there were 6 of us.
Oh, that's organized chaos.
Right.
Unequivocally, do you know how many relationships are involved with 6 people? 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2. When you configure all the different possibilities,
right?
That's a lot of different relationships to be able to cope with. In fact, it's impossible. So the fact that you're here talking intelligently right now is nothing short of a miracle.
Right? Well, so as I was growing up, I had a sibling that we were very close as far as age. My sister wasn't even a year later than myself, and then my brother was the same situation. It was almost like the Irish twin thing, or triplet thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember my brother Jack always pushing on my dad in the morning. There was always this interaction between them. And as siblings, we were always like, you're going to get the same answer. Why do you keep doing the same thing? And he just kept doing that, right? And now as an adult, he tells me my dad loved me so much. And I'm like, well, we all thought you were going to go, we all thought you were going to be on the chopping block here. What's the deal? And so I find it fascinating how he thought all this interaction was always positive, and the rest of us were like, what are you doing?
I would imagine that the first time you heard him say that, you said to yourself, what in the world are you talking about? That was what was organized chaos that you were creating with him, right?
It truly was.
People have a tendency to want to clean up that sort of thing in their head so that they're more comfortable with it. Oh, no, that was wonderful. Me and Dad, we got along great. Yeah.
Right.
Who's he talking about? Not ours, right?
Well, wow. I always wondered if it was partly just that he wanted attention, and that was his way of getting it, because it was always going to be the same response. I mean, my dad didn't waver too much. His response was very similar every time. And we were always thinking, when are you going to figure this one out? Why do you keep repeating this?
I think your point is well taken, and is probably right on point, because he had so many kids in the household. So he was trying to make sure he could carve out that space for himself and get the attention from. So I have no doubt what you just said is absolutely correct. And a lot of people are listening right now are reliving some of those moments from their own. It's amazing how this kind of ripple thing, everybody's thinking, oh yeah, I remember something like that. Yeah.
Right.
Hopefully it will be useful now that they're hearing it now and can shift it around in their mind and feel okay with it now that they have more understanding about it.
So how long does it usually take to make these positive changes?
It depends. For some people, assuming that they can make 2 layers simultaneously, that's singularly the most important thing we do is sleep. I've said this to countless numbers of people, and they say, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, when you think about all the things that happen while you're sleeping, uh, you have to realize that cognitive functioning is dependent on how well you sleep, how much rest you get. Because while you're, I mean, aside from all the interactional things that have to be done from categorizing and organizing the events of the day, your brain cleans itself every night, which is something most people don't realize. And people, when you really think about how important cleaning your brain is, you'll start thinking about sleep differently. But all right, so that part of it is essential. And if you don't, you not only don't function well cognitively, but you don't function well emotionally, because we all know how irritable and cranky we can get when we're sleep deprived, right? And then there's the third thing that happens, and that is appetite gets amped up when you're sleep deprived, because your brain needs more energy because it's working that much harder. So everything that could go wrong goes wrong when you don't get enough sleep. So that organic aspect of our life, that comes first, right? Because I've run this by so many people in my practice. One of the first things that I ask them is, how much sleep do you get every night? Most of the time I'll get an answer like 4.5 to 5.5 hours sleep, which usually is about 1/3 less than people need. And most people don't realize that. They know it's important, but they don't realize how much sleep deprivation that they have. So you get that organized first, and then you pick out something that's top of the line for them. One thing that they can have, well, first of all, get more sleep and see what happens. Now we have more of your resources are now available to yourself. So you pick one thing. What's the starting point? What brought you into this office right now? Because typically, it's a one thing got things into motion, whether it's a marital thing, and then from that marital thing, it might lead to, okay, you're still working out something that occurred to you when you were a kid. Let's get that cleaned up first. So little bits and pieces, but that's the nuts and bolts of what you want to have happen. For some people, you can do things really quickly. For some people, it takes extended periods of time, like a PTSD case where people have been traumatized, like the sexual abuse things that have occurred for years. That's going to take some time for people to be able to get their lives back together, assuming that they're going to be able to do that in ways that reflect change. So it all depends who you are, what's happened, and for how long, and it'll change depending on that.
I love that you bring up the topic of sleep, because we talk about that on our podcast very, very frequently. And sleep just trumps everything. And you talked about mental health and cognitive function, but physical health too. And of course, that. But if you're not sleeping, we tell people, that are trying to lose weight, for instance, they're trying to lose weight. If they're not sleeping, it doesn't matter how much they exercise. Doesn't matter how well they eat. If they're not sleeping, none of it is going to get better. You have to be sleeping. And you mentioned 4.5 hours was 1/3 what we need. So we always talk about 8 to 9 hours. What are your thoughts about hours of sleep per night, and maybe naps or per day too, or what?
I can only basically base what I'm saying in terms of my own experience, and figuring out my experience is probably the average. So what I try to do is average 7.5 hours, right? And I never wake up with an alarm clock, except if I have to catch an early flight somewhere and I want to make sure I get up. But I'm usually up before the alarm, because that's just patterns. And as we found out recently, because there's a bunch of research that came out within the last year or so that says it's not only how many hours, it's consistently as to when you get those hours. You don't want to keep jumping around. Yeah, you can get 7.5 hours, but it's at different times of the day. Not a good idea. Your brain likes consistency. Patterns are really important. So you can probably get by between 6.5 to 6:45, which would leave you, let's say, one cycle short in a day. But I think your brain might be able to adjust to that. So 6 hours and 45 minutes might be just enough, but I would opt for trying to get 7.5 hours sleep. You'll know it. You'll know the different subtleties that are involved with a single 45-minute cycle. But hey, if you don't do this, and you brought it up just before in just the right way, this is it. This is the foundation. This is, and how you handle yourself, how you take care of yourself is our foundational intelligence. And sleep is the linchpin for our foundational intelligence. Eating, sleeping, moving. Those three pieces form our personal ecology. If you don't do these things correctly, then the psychological things you're working on are never going to perform the way you hope yourself to perform. It simply won't work that way. So
I love it. Yeah, those are the three pillars that we talk about all the time. It's pretty, I mean, I don't want to say simple, but it's pretty basic. It is difficult to implement. There's no doubt about it. But those are the basic principles that you need to focus on: sleep, diet, and exercise.
Which is why the lumping all these three pieces together as their own ecology, and then you put them together with the other intelligences, right? Back in the 1990s, emotional intelligence, EQ, was born, right? Dan Goldman wrote a book based on a couple of social psychologists, Peter Salovey and John Mayer, two obviously very important psychologists, wrote a paper called Emotional Intelligence, introducing the idea of a second intelligence. First there was IQ, now there was EQ. Okay, well now there's a third intelligence, LQ, right? Lifestyle intelligence. One way to help people look at this, to make it more appealing to do, is to call it an intelligence, so that you feel as if you're doing something smart, not just healthy. Smart gets people's attention, right? Nobody says smart is bad. Have you ever heard that? No. That's never been uttered in the history of our species. Somebody said, you know, smart is really bad. No, never said. So it's really important to do, so people to listen to what the two of you are doing day in and day out, is saying, hey, wake up, be smart. This is the foundation of what you do. And if you do it better, you're going to have a better life. And you'll be smiling more, and you'll be leaner, and you'll be more energized. One of the things that I ask people, and it's a kind of a trick question, what's the best gift you can give your children? Now, people immediately would say, well, you're loving my child. You know, that's not a gift. That's an obligation. Everybody knows that one. But thinking about it from a different perspective, based on everything the two of you do, what would you think it would be? It would be model these things for your kid. Have them watch you day in and day out take care of yourself. You never have to utter a word after that. They will be watching. Mom and dad, do it right. This is the way you do it. They will, if you don't do it right, they will model what you do anyway, and it's going to make their life that much more difficult. Right? Modeling the right things. So if you're there displaying this without talking about it, unless they ask a question, they'll just assume working out, that's what you do. Eating healthy, that's what you do. And they will hopefully do exactly what you do. And I would say 75, 80% of the time, it will play itself out that way.
Yeah, I agree with that. We get it all the time in our pharmacy practice when somebody's struggling to lose, somebody has family, they have kids, that a mother has a kid that is struggling to lose weight, or they're overweight. And, you know, one of the things we have to be really honest about is like, well, you know, how do you eat? And typically many times the parents are overweight also. It's really difficult to ask your parents or to have your kids not be obese if you're obese. So if you're eating bad, they're going to be eating bad. They're going to just follow what their parents do. That's how they learn.
Yes, absolutely. One of the more interesting phenomenon to observe is to, if you see a family walking along, and I have a block where I have my office, and one of the things I love doing is watch people. I love watching people go by. And what am I going to learn about these people as they just wander by, and watching like a mother and her daughter who's like 7 years old walk by, and you'll see not only does the child walk like mom, but is slowly modeling her body to look like mom. That means mom is feeding her just enough food to keep her a little bit overweight now, but it will eventually get, and so they'll look like twins after a while. All of it completely outside of awareness. Unbelievable to watch that, to actually see it in real, and I can't remember how many hundreds of times I've seen that event in front of me as people are walking by. Like, I know exactly the way this is set up, and it's remarkable that it floats outside of awareness.
So I'm just out of curiosity. I'm curious. Does the same thing happen with a son and a mom, or is it more of a son and a dad, or is there a difference there?
It will probably be a little bit more specific to gender, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. More often, but not always. But it's remarkable how much is learned and modeled completely. I'll give you an example from my own experience, how weird things can be modeled. Okay. I remember a long time ago, my wife and I were having an argument, and while she was talking, I caught a look of myself in the mirror, because I was opposite the big mirror in our living room. And it was the first time this ever happened. So I could see the expression on my face while this was taking place. What did I see on my face? The one expression that my father used to have that I hated. And here I suddenly realized that I had modeled this awful looking expression completely outside of awareness. I got to tell you something. It freaked me out on so many different levels. I said, oh my. I mean, in one level, it was enlightening to think about, okay, it means that we can model things, observe things completely outside of awareness, and then employ them without knowing it's actually happening. And if you can do it with a facial expression, which, like, if you know you're seeing something and you can feel it in your body, that's one thing. But a facial expression, how do you do that? I still don't know how it's done. All I know is it can be done, and I can't. Now I know what that feeling is, at least, so I know when that creepy face comes up on my face. At least I know it's there, and I try to change it as quickly as I can.
Very interesting you say that, because my father passed away right before our first child was born. But my second child, I remember watching him speak and thinking, that's something my dad used to do. How did he pick that up? But now I get it. It's something I have done with my hands, or how I spoke, or, I was modeling, that speech pattern with my hands from my father, and I've just passed it on.
Oh,
so fascinating.
We all share this. I very much appreciate that, because every single one of us is wired to learn observationally, right? We need that. The problem is, if too much junk gets shown to us consistently, it's in the mix. But it's important to recognize that variable is in play, because that can set into motion watching yourself a little bit more often. And if you can improve your overall quality of how you behave and interact enough so that people make comments about it in a good way, that'll keep that momentum going, which is what it's all about, trajectory.
Yeah, for sure. It is. So it's multi-generational.
Oh yeah. Things get yeah. How far back did they start? Oh, no question.
So what does, in your lifestyle intelligence practice, what does your typical patient come in for?
Weight tends to be the headline act for most people most of the time. Sometimes it's sleep related stuff. Other times it's relationships which are affecting the way they organize all of these other activities. But obviously I address it in general in terms of the app that I have, which helps people focus on these issues in bits and pieces of information so that they can play with things every day. I provide 3 minutes of a little bit of eating, sleeping, moving, so that they can begin to consistently reflect, because I'm not giving them too much to think about, and it's consistent day by day by day. And then I have some audio material that I use, which is a little bit different than audio material that people have heard before. There is one state of consciousness that we're in every day for a very brief period of time, and it's the space between waking and sleep. Do you remember, do you have ever experienced that hypnagogic state? Right. You're in it very briefly, and the next thing you know, you're asleep and reflect on the following morning.
Yeah,
Well,
that's true.
I figured out a way how to lengthen the amount of time you can be in that state, but not when you're sleeping. And the way I did that is by using, it's an audio technology where you listen to stories. And most of the time while you're listening, you hear 2 stories at the same time, 1 in each ear. Now, when I explain this to people, everybody has the same response, like, what?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right.
What are you talking about? I say, well, I don't want you to listen. And they'll go, well, then what's the point? But the point is that when you stop listening, and by the way, this is done in a very relaxing way. There's music in the background. I'm talking very slowly. The stories can be very engaging. By the way, it starts off with a single story and then splits into 2 stories.
So tell us more about this app you're talking about.
Well, this is part of what the way the app is set up. The app is set up with 3-minute segments, 1 a day, where you get an opportunity to listen to a bit of information, like one of the things that we have been talking about over the last half hour or so. In other words, a piece of information about eating, sleeping, and moving, about motivation, about relaxation, about relationships and how they affect what you do. So 3 minutes a day where I allow you then for the rest of that day to think about what I just gave you, okay? That's the front end. The back end is a whole bunch of these audio programs that you use in your spare time. The whole idea is to get you into that state in between waking and sleep through this relaxed storytelling, multiple storytelling established technique called hypnoperipheral processing. Using the words and the phrases from the stories, I construct positive messages for you to be able to change the way you think, the way you feel, the way you sense, and the way you behave. Most of the time, you have no memory of what's going on, but this information is being processed by that state of consciousness, by your brain, in a way that it's never been utilized before. So the combination of these different layers of consciousness together offer the listener an opportunity to learn on multiple levels and have this learning be applied to their lifestyle management so that they can begin to make changes in the particular areas in their life that are problematic. So I'm going at it in ways that allow all the brainwave states to be stimulated.
So tell us more. Tell us about this website. What is the website and how do people get to it and get a hold of you?
You can go directly to the site itself. It's called Lifestyle Intelligence LQ. It's all one word, lowercase letters, Lifestyle Intelligence LQ. It'll pop up on your screen. There'll be me basically talking for a couple of minutes, explaining everything just like I'm explaining it right now. And you can test this thing out for a couple of weeks and see whether it fits for you. And my belief is you'll find it useful, and hopefully begin to generate change in your life. It's what I do is different than other things that have been done, integrating some things that have been done, but in a completely different kind of way. So
I love it. So Lloyd, as we wrap this podcast up, tell us what you have a passion for.
Well, I love old rock and roll music, which I grew up with, right? So, man, I was born in 1947, so I was there for the birth of rock and roll and soul music and Motown and Stax. So I used to play the drums before I got into this business, and but my musical career, let's say, didn't go anywhere, so I had to figure out a way to make a living. My other passion is I like little children and dogs.
I love it. So I got to define, as rock has been out for 70 years now, when we say old rock, like to me, classic rock is different than what my kids would say classic rock is. So
they probably think Bruce Springsteen is classic rock and roll.
Oh, for sure. And they think Nirvana is classic rock, right?
Understood.
So what would you consider old rock and roll, and what is your favorite band?
Well, if I were to do like a Mount Rushmore of who I would see on the mountain, it would be Little Richard, Jerry Lee Lewis, Jackie Wilson, Otis Redding, and Elvis, and the Beatles. I've expanded.
Yeah, I mean, you got to put the Beatles in there, but all those other people were pre-Beatles.
Oh, I know. That's the Beatles. Yeah. Learned everything from those original guys.
Right. Cool. Right. Awesome. I love it.
But they belong up there. And so what can I say? I mean, I can get
right. Well, Lloyd, thank you for being on our show today. You've helped us realize our goal, which is to educate and empower individuals to take charge of their own health. So thank you for helping us.
I am delighted to be here. This was a joy.
All right. And listeners and viewers, thank you for tuning in to Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham. Tune into our regularly scheduled podcast Monday, Pacific Standard Time, 12:30 to 1:30. Thank you for listening.